1. Ghosts. Ghost stories have been around as long as stories have been around. Interesting to note though is how our relationship with them has changed over time. So in ancient Greece, where basically our modern culture comes from, it started with basically there was the living and there was the dead. And that was it really. They didn't bother one another, and that was just how it was. Over time, you slowly got the idea though that actually the dead could be helpful. With the idea that a spirit, when it leaves your body, becomes basically unbounded. There was also this idea that it wasn't just unbounded by space and this natural realm or whatever, it was also unbounded by time, and therefore if you could contact a spirit you could get them to tell you the future, and this was called necromancy. Isn't that cool? So yeah, necromancy isn't the revival of the dead for nefarious purposes. No, it is the contacting of the dead in order to foretell the future. Necromancy went out of practice because it was kind of frowned upon. So you had all these years of the dead basically running little errands for us, and kind of rightfully you got the idea that maybe they might start getting a bit annoyed with that. And from that idea of they might be getting a bit annoyed, they also got the idea that actually they could be dangerous. And so started the idea of restless spirits, people who had died particularly bad deaths or suffered really bad during their lives, and unfairness and improper burials, that's a big one. They would haunt their resting place or haunt specific people until they got their reward, like their bones buried properly or whatever it is that they wanted, justice being served, whatever. And this is why we have funeral rituals. It's to make sure that when we die we go so we don't hang around and bother the living and potentially harm people or just bother. Another interesting thing to note about the history of ghosts is the history of ghostly experiences. All the stories of ghostly encounters throughout the ages, they're all kind of the same. You have spirits seen walking down corridors, ghostly footsteps that you can only hear, strange sounds, lights, smells. In our house we had a room that was haunted by the smell of cigar smoke. Cigar smoke, was it? Or was it? Anyway, apparently that's a popular one. No, pipe smoke. That's a popular one. There's also strange breezes. Modern ones are electrical interference. Oh, and of course, that feeling of something in the corner of your eye. Sorry, I just got reminded of Doctor Who. And general feelings of unease, being watched, and dread. Also, Judge Dredd, that's going to be in the cinema soon. Oh, so cool. Trivia break! Okay, did you know that... No, of course you won't know. The Afrikaans for Candyfloss is spookasem, meaning ghost breath. I love that! Also, the practice of young people going to visit spooky places for kicks and thrills is known as legend tripping. Part 2. Brief history of contacting the dead. Like I said earlier, necromancy started up, went down quite quick. People did not approve. Only got popular again pretty darn recently, about 200 years ago, with the start of a new religion called spiritualism. Great name. One day, the Fox family moved into a new house, and after a few days in the new house, they decided it was haunted because there was lots of weird stuff happening. Instead of just dealing with it, one of the girls, little Margareta, she decided to try and communicate with the spirit. And she succeeded, apparently. Although rather than being useful, and actually getting it to stop, she was able to get it to copy her. So whenever she'd knock on something, like, she would get back. Not particularly impressive to me, but the family was impressed. They showed it to their mum, and she was convinced. Then they showed it to investigators and reporters, and they were convinced, and they were able to ask the ghosts questions, and it would reply in knocks. So you had to ask very special questions. One day, Kate and Margaretta, the two fox girls, grew up and went out into the world, and oddly enough, the ghosts followed them. So, because they were mediums, of course, that's the reason, that must be the reason. They're the only ones who can do it, so makes sense. So they went around making their fortune by contacting people's dead relatives and friends, and telling them all about the afterlife, and oh, isn't it blurry here? So this went on, and basically everyone in America believed it. Until one day, no, scratch that, one day, the Fox sisters had enough. They confessed. It was a magic trick. It was a little trick that they played on their mother. What they had was an apple on a string, and whenever their mother asked a question, in the dark they'd pull on the string and the apple would bounce strangely against the wall and make a tapping noise that sounded a bit unnatural. And over the years they just adapted that to become more impressive. It was all a lie. And they told the world, and the world didn't care, quite frankly. All they did was ruin their own reputation as mediums. So now, ghosts are, though they don't exist, pretty much everywhere. You've got horrible over-the-phone psychics and mediums, ghost hunting TV shows, which are, brain-achingly awful. Right, next time I will be telling you about all the ways in which ghosts aren't actually there or impressive in many ways. I'll be telling you about the methods that con artists and entertainers use to create fake ghosts, and I'll be telling you about the psychological sort of phenomenons behind the phenomenons. Yes, I will. You heard me right. I was going to tell you a joke. A ghost and her boyfriend walk into a bar. The boyfriend says, ouch.